You.
All right, welcome to our, what seemingly is our weekly New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. Today we have extraordinary guest, President of the National Baseball Hall of Fame Museum in Cooperstown, Tim Mead. We'll get to him in a few seconds. So let me go over some business that's going on.
Next week.
The rest of the schedule for March, we have Dan Taylor, who's in the audience tonight, talking about the Hollywood stars. On March 18th, it was tentative with Carl Erskine. It is no longer tentative. He is on. The only issue with Carl is I had to do a practice with him, and he's going to be on the screen, not his face. He's going to be calling in. Regardless of that, should be fabulous. What a nice man. And I went over the procedure with his wife on Tuesday, and we seem like we're good. So the 25th, thanks to Rick Swig, who's here tonight, we have Larry Bear.
So would you like me to go in the other room?
Oh, by the way, when Carl is on, more than ever, you got to mute your, I don't like to be a school teacher and mute everybody. You got to mute your stuff so there's no interference. Okay. On April, Jared Rifkin, Jay Rifkin's son, is going to sponsor a quiz show, trivia with the New York Giants. So that'll be good. Lincoln Mitchell on April 15th. Two books. One's on the Giants moving west with the Dodgers. The other is a brand new book about baseball in San Francisco. Noel Hind on 4/22. We'll be discussing Johnny Antonelli. And Jeff Stewart, who's here tonight, also on 4/29, we'll be talking about his book, Twilight Teams, the last year that teams played in their cities before they moved out. David Krell on May 6th, Willie Mays' birthday, who wrote a book, 1962 Baseball and JFK. So great stuff coming up.
Gary, can I just take a minute or minute and a half? You know, this New York Giant Preservation Society is now almost 10 years old, and it's been on the map. The map is getting smaller, but the organization is getting larger. And I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Gary Mintz. What he's done in these last 6 or 8 months,
Thank you, Steve.
It's priceless. Every Thursday night, and the cast of characters keeps getting better. He did leave out one. We have an inkling now of getting the daughter of Mel Ott to come on at some point, and I know that's going to be something special. She lives out here in Tucson. I just want to reiterate what Gary said about the Erskine thing. You know, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. Sometimes the phone rings. When Carl Erskine is speaking in 2 weeks, he's 94 years old, but he's got all his scruples. We should all, I mean, Gary could mute us. I know he's not going to do that. We should mute ourselves while he's speaking. Gary was a former teacher like I was. He has a terrific ability to keep the meeting moving, and he'll know when to start getting questions. So instead of having your wife or husband say, go walk the dog or turn off the light while Carl is speaking, we should all mute ourselves. And I'm sure Gary will remind us next week. So Gary, what you've done is just priceless. And I think everybody appreciates it. Thank you so much.
Sure do. Thanks, Gary.
One other thing, one of my friends who's a terrific writer for the New York Post, Ken Davidoff, I don't know if he's in the crowd, but if he does show up, we welcome him with open arms. Let's get down to business. Tonight, we have the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame, Tim Mead. Tim is going to talk about his career. You know, here's a man who left Anaheim for the snowbound little town of Cooperstown, which if any of you have never been there, those who haven't been there, it is really a fabulous place, and it is truly where baseball lives. So Tim is going to speak about his career in baseball with the Angels, and then his decision to go to Cooperstown, And then he's going to field questions. Now, one thing, a lot of you might have questions about certain players being in the hall. Tim does not have a vote or anything like that, but you can feel free to ask whatever you want of him. He will give you a straightforward answer as best he can. He's going to also discuss the decision to cancel, it's going to be a virtual TV induction ceremony this summer. And, whatever he's going to tell us will be very informative. I cannot thank you, Tim, enough for showing up tonight. This is really big time, and we really appreciate you coming. So without any further ado, Tim Mead.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I appreciate my first question is, how can somebody in their 40s retire?
I wish I was that. I'm closing in on 60 somehow. So.
Well, congratulations. First of all, it's a pleasure to spend some time with you this evening. One thing you'll find about me is I don't have a pre-rehearsed or written down script that I follow. I always tell people I'll start at home plate and maybe wander out to center field and over to third base and over to second, but I'll end up back at home when all is said and done. The things that I'm going to express are my thoughts, and one of the important things, as we get into this, really is the only thing that really separates those of you on the other end of on the screen from me is I've just had two great jobs in baseball, but I'm a super fan and a fan of the game overall. So that's really it. But I've spent 40 years, I guess, first and foremost, part of the depth of my love for baseball, my love for this country is I was adopted in Athens, Greece, 1958, came over. My adoptive parents, who are my parents, picked me up from an orphanage in Athens. We went to London for 2 years. My dad was in the Air Force. We went settled in Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida, Arlington, Virginia, where my dad worked at the Pentagon. It was there that I saw my first baseball game with the Senators, who were my club. Frank Howard was my first idol. Somebody really looked up to, literally. But my first game with our Little League team was a Yankee-Senator game, and saw Howard and Mantle hit home runs. And when you walked in and you saw the big green backyard, I was hooked. And the Senators had a great uniform and a great logo. We moved out to California in '69, drove across country after my dad retired. First night out there, we're getting settled into the house without furniture that didn't come for almost 2.5 weeks later. My dad had gone out to the commissary and picked up some K rations. So we were sitting on the floor eating off a Foot Locker or trunk in the kitchen. And my dad happened to pull out a transistor radio, Angels and Red Sox, and I listened to Dick Enberg. And the rest, they say, is history. And I was hooked on the Angels, though I went to probably pretty much the same amount of Dodger games. Went to school out, grew up in San Bernardino, California, on the outskirts of San Bernardino. Spent so much time driving to Dodger games and Angel games. Went to college in 10th grade. I wrote every ball club in 10th grade about how you join, what do you need to do to have a career. In 10th grade, you don't know anything about anything, but PR directors at that time were kind enough, probably 80% of them, to respond to me. Go to college, get your education, really was the common theme. And to this day, even though I'm not as good at it because of emails and the number you get, I still try to respond to every email I get, particularly from students and young people, because somewhere along the line, when I was a know-nothing many, many years ago, established, accomplished PR people took the time to respond to me, and I'll never forget that. So moving forward, played baseball, wasn't good enough. At some point, you realize how many people are better than you, so you better find another avenue into the game. I went to school to be a journalist. a writer. You know, I wanted to be a Jim Murray or, just I wanted to be around the ball club, and maybe writing was the only way to do it. I was very fortunate in the summer of 1980 to get an internship with the Angels, at which time I met some very influential people in my life. But it wasn't a particularly good year for the club. And I saw some things that went on in relationship wise. And it really was at that point that I determined I didn't have the fortitude to pursue a journalism career. And I admire everybody in the field today. I really do, genuinely admire them. But I just didn't think I was going to be capable of writing over at times the shortcomings or failures, if you will, of people doing something that I was never good enough to succeed at. I just had a fundamental problem with that in my own mind. So I did the internship, finished, tried to come back a second year, and the club said, hey, it's kind of like mom and dad saying it's time to leave the house. So they advised me to go, maybe go get a real job because you weren't paid anything as an intern. About 3 weeks after that, after I applied in January of '81, the Angels called, and I joined the organization basically as a secretary in stadium operations for 2 days. Then Buzzy Bavasi called me into his office. Gentleman I always will hold in the highest regard, and the secretary and public relations left, and I was transferred down there. So with my college degree, I went from $8,800 a year to $10,000 a year. I got my first salary increase for transferring departments. And then from there, folks, it was just, bear down and work. And I went from different roles within the organization to assistant. I was a media relations director at 26 with Reggie Jackson and that cast of characters from 80 that we had in 86, Rod Carew, and just some fantastic people. Eventually became the assistant general manager for 4 years. And I realized that my calling was in PR. I enjoyed those times, the 4 years spent working with Bill Bavasi, Buzzy's son, as the assistant GM, but it is a thankless job. And whatever you read about general managers and different things, it is just a very, very difficult job. And then just continued on. I was with the club 1982, my second full year. We went to the playoffs, had a 2-0 lead against the Brewers. In the best of 5, lost that one. 1986, we had a 3-1 lead, 1 pitch away with a 5-2 lead in the top of the 9th, a 3-1 lead overall against the Red Sox. Didn't go to the World Series that year, and didn't see or sniff the postseason again for 16 years until 2002, at which time we started 6-14. People were calling for the heads of our general manager and our manager, Mike Scioscia. We ended up winning 99 games that year as a wild card team, lost the first game of the division series, the LCS and the World Series. And I have a World Series ring today because of that group of dirtbag, hard-nosed, selfless ball players. The decision to come here was the toughest decision of my life. My family is still back in Southern California. I joke and people look at me kind of like I'm insane, but I live in California, but I reside and work in Cooperstown. And this is probably the only thing other than being a roadie for Metallica or a rock band from the 70s that could have pulled me away from the best job in the world, as far as I was concerned. It was my club. It was my network. I lived there 51 years. My dear friends, to give up the opportunity to work with Mike Trout each and every day was not easy. And I will tell you, it factored into my decision of, aside from my family, and then to be around Albert Pujols, toward the end of at least of his Angel career, and leave those two people and then some other outstanding folks that I'd worked with for 25 to 30 years. But the opportunity to follow in the footsteps of my dear friend Jeff Idelson, who I hold in the highest regard because of his commitment to the Hall and to the game, is really the reason I left. I will say this. I didn't ask specific questions. There wasn't a contract to be signed. It wasn't like you needed, the title was more important. It's purely the love of baseball that brought me from Orange County to upstate New York. I did not own a parka for the last 51 years. I have 3 parkas, warm, warmer, and warmest right now. So, that's part of it. And I would tell you, and many of you have had great careers, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's easy to stay in your comfort zone. It's just easy. And I could roll out of bed, and there were days that were very, very difficult because you knew what lied ahead, pardon me, at the office. But you look forward to it at the same time. But coming here to Cooperstown, and I told the staff, I felt like I was a freshman on a college campus, and I'm learning from a lot of associate professors, because I can tell you a lot about Angels history, and I can tell you about the insides out of Mike and watching him grow, and Gene Autry and being around, and Michael Eisner, just all the things. But then there's the history of the game, and that's what your group is, and I applaud and respect that. But it's the depth of the history of the game. And forever amount of time that I end up being in Cooperstown, I'm just going to scratch the surface of the real history of baseball, because you just will never know everything. And I have conversations, guys, with our curatorial people that I think I probably look like I'm in a drunken stupor, because my jaw just drops out of the interest in the things that I'm learning. Some of these guys that I work with can look at a picture from 1923, 1919, All-Star game, whatever, and they can tell you 15, 20, 25-minute story of all the variables and elements of that photo. To me, I just see 18 guys lined up or whatever. It's phenomenal to go through the museum. I had this desire to say that, at some point I could tell you where all 333 plaques are, what's said on them, the lineup, the rows. I'm here to confess I failed in that in the first 18 months, but it's still a bucket list goal, so we'll see. But it's a privilege to be at the symbolic home of baseball. And, I get reminded every now and then that I'm not on a club level. I'm now representing or part of representing 30 teams and the history of the game. I love the game. Some people would say, maybe even a couple family members, that I let the game consume me at times. I remember periodically going home on a Sunday game after a loss where my wife would tell my son, just give him a space today. I lost in on the top of the ninth or something like that. All that kind of eased up after we won a World Series. I would tell you that it wasn't quite the same intensity, but I used to get in trouble in school for best friends, a young man named Jeffrey Harris, and we would get caught periodically sending baseball questions to each other and giving each other tests when the real education was going on at the front of the room. But a couple times I wasn't sly enough to slide the questions. We read books, we challenged each other. I fell in love with the game on the back of baseball cards. Mac Jones in the 1970 collection was one of the last cards I was able to secure, and I will remember Mac Jones to the day I die. I've had experiences that, if somebody asked me to write a book, you'd have to bring a lot of them out of me just in conversation, because I've forgotten. The Angels figured out I was around 748 players with the Angels through my 40 years. And it wasn't the name players that were always the most impressive. I get asked who is my favorite. You can't ask that question. It's kind of like saying, it's just an impossible question to ask. But, I watched Mike Trout, who will, I believe, arguably be one of the greatest players of all time. And I'm here to tell you that for everything you hear about Mike Trout as a player, he is a much better person than he is a player. And, you know, if that doesn't tell you everything about him, he's as loyal could be, married his high school sweetheart, building a compound back in his hometown. And he loves the game. He plays it with enthusiasm. He plays it with fun. He makes everybody around him better. You know, the one thing that I would tell you about Mike that makes Mike great is nobody's going to change him. He's not into being a marketing machine. He's not into self-promotion or anything else like that. He just goes out and plays the game. He's kind of what you want a ball player to be. I've seen a lot of great events, memorable moments. You know, I was with Reggie when he hit his 500th, and Rod Carew when he had his 3,000th hit, Mike Witt when he had his perfect game in Texas. My dear friend, the late Don Sutton, when he had his 300th win with us. 2 All-Star games, 1989 and 2010. The postseasons in the 80s, and then what we ran off in 2000 when it was just part of a 100-win team, which was a real thrill. I got to spend quality time with Gene Autry, and that's probably one of the last times you hear me say Gene Autry. It's always Mr. Autry. One of the most gracious human beings that I ever met. And if Mr. Autry's suite today at Angel Stadium is still the same as it was when he passed away. And when you walk around in his suite, it's not photos of him as a singing cowboy. There's a couple of them in there, but there's photos with Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, baseball people, and presidents. And that's when Mr. Autry really was his happiest, when he could be around baseball people for all the things. I mean, here's a man who has 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but it was baseball. When I go back to 1986, which I alluded to earlier, and we had that 3-1 lead, 64,000 people in our ballpark going nuts. It was the one time that I saw the media really lose their objectivity. And because Mr. Autry was so beloved, not just by the fans in Orange County, but by media and people around the country, they were pulling for us to finish off that series and get him to a World Series. In 2002, our right fielder, Tim Salmon, we'd given him one of the patches that we wore the year Mr. Autry passed away. And Tim put he put that patch in his back pocket and took it out there each of those games in October of that year. Also had one of Jimmy Reese. I hope some of you in this call may remember who Jimmy Reese was. He was Babe Ruth's teammate, and just a phenomenal individual. But, you know, that was two of the most special people in Angels history for me. Then there's people like David Eckstein, you know, who defies all the analytics today and would have had a hard time appearing on a radar screen for anybody. But he's a 2-time world champion, won a MVP World Series championship with the Cardinals, and then with us in 2002. He was a grinder. He played the game right. He was just good enough to do it right. But his attention to detail and the way he approached the game made everybody around him better. Absolutely everybody. I think, and I've alluded to it a couple times, but when I look back at our world championship team, it's the irony, or what's ironic about that club is nobody on that team was an MVP. Nobody on that club at the time in 2002 had World Series experience, and nobody was going to be a Hall of Fame candidate. I mean, it was a club that played hard. It was a grinding club. And, I know it was a West Coast series with the Giants and the Angels that year, but if any of you recall it, I don't think you'll ever see or have seen a louder, consistent postseason crowd than 2002. And I know there have been great games and great ballparks through the years, but we were down 5-0 in Game 6, down 3-2 in the series, and it was as loud as it was for the first pitch in Game 1. That fan base never backed off, absolutely never backed off. So moving forward, February of 2019, Jeff Idelson and I met in Tempe. He told me he was retiring from the Hall and would I be interested in being on the list. for interviews. I thought about it for 5-6 days, never even mentioned it to my wife because I was in spring training, and I called him back and I said, you know what, Jeff, I have a grandson, a new grandson. My wife's here. This is home, and it's Southern California. In bad days, it's 72 degrees. So I said, I can't do it, but I thank you for the opportunity and, the ego boost that you would even think I could do it. A couple of days later, Jane Forbes Clark texted me and called and just said, appreciate your consideration to be interviewed, not to get the job. And, would you be open for a conversation? And to me, I grew up in a military family, so you respect chain of command and you respect people in charge. And I thought, what can it hurt? And she was going to fly and meet me on the road because we were going to Chicago and Texas. And I told her, I said, ma'am, I will fly to meet you in Florida. So at the very least, I thought all I was going to cost her would be her time and a lunch. We had a 2.5-hour lunch and never finished my salad. By the time I got back to the airport, I called her and just said, if things work out, when would the interview process begin? And she said, well, in the time you've driven back from our lunch to the airport, I've called the executive committee, so I'm going to offer you the job. And I was leaning against a wall and literally dropped my bag because I thought, it's put up or shut up time now. You flew out here. What are you going to do? It took me literally another 5-6 days, some hard conversations with my family. I didn't tell the Angels about it until I had accepted the job. And I called Artie Marino, my owner, who's actually on our board now here in Cooperstown, and our club president, John Carpino. I'm not one who's ever tried to, I don't believe in leverage. I don't believe in, you're either all in or you're not in. And outside of, kind of the worry and the hardship from the family standpoint, that's what I did. And I am blessed for 40 great years with an organization. The goal was to be there 50. I don't know at the pace that things are demanded from you. I don't know that I would have lasted till I was 70, 71. I certainly would have given every effort to try, but I'm fully in love with what I'm doing right now and dedicated to this. And it provides me the opportunity to talk to good folks like yourself. So that's a longer Reader's Digest version of 40 years or 62 years, either way you want to look at it. So at this point, I'd like to open it up and thank you for your time. Gary, I appreciate this opportunity, obviously, and you reaching out initially to join you tonight.
Tim, thank you so much. I just want to make everybody aware, there are 2 screens tonight. We got 50 people in here just about. So I can't see anybody. So the best thing to do is when you get a moment, and you try not to talk over anybody, and Tim will answer any and all questions. Tim, before we really get involved in the questions, can you just give us your update on the induction this summer?
Absolutely. Obviously, I think, Gary, we certainly didn't anticipate at this time last year, after we canceled the ceremony in July last year in April. And I don't think any of us in our wildest imagination thought that we were going to go through a continuation of the pandemic. But it was through a lot of discussion and board input. We're all continuing, although I think the lights are at the end of the tunnels here soon. There's still the reality of having to plan something in advance, and the induction ceremony is not something that you can have that's movable and just say, hey, we'll wait in May and see if you can shift it another month. There's just so many preparations in advance. The ultimate responsibility is the safety concerns of everybody involved, not just the Hall of Famers, not just the staff, but the guests and really the village of Cooperstown. So it was a hard decision because this isn't an event that you charge tickets or a price for tickets, and the Hall of Fame is going to make X amount of dollars for it. And there's a certain feeling of responsibility to the village. But we had to move forward. You couldn't postpone it and wait 3 years between induction ceremonies. It's not fair on a lot of levels. So, we right now we have an indoor ceremony scheduled, and we're hoping even some of the limitations that we're faced with the current restrictions are eased a little bit, certainly by July, so that we can do some things differently. We're all very aware of how big and how important and how many people have waited for this, for the class of 2020. But I would tell you the 3 living members of that class, and obviously Marvin Miller's family on the outside, but the 3 living members have been, informed along the way and in our understanding of the situation. So we're going to do it July 25th, and it'll be on the MLB network.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open again. I can't really see. There are 2 screens, so if you have a question for Tim, fire away and don't talk over each other.
Yes, I have a question. Harken back to the 2002 World Series, Tim. I believe it was the 7th inning. Russ Ortiz was pitching, 5-0 shutout. He was taken out by Dusty Baker, who gave him the ball. In the bullpen was, I believe, Felix Rodriguez and Rob Nen. The Giants did not disclose or put the miles per hour on the scoreboard of how fast they were throwing because they had sore arms. Were the Angels aware of that?
Yeah, Marza, it's a great question. And I'm sure with all the inside information at that point of the season, they may. I mean, when you get to that point of a season anyway, it's like an Indy race. You have finely tuned machines that start the race. By the end of the race, even the winner is that close to being broken down. So I can't really specifically answer those questions, but you could tell everybody was fatigued. I know our pitching staff was fatigued. I mean, if you go back and look, we threw a rookie, John Lackey, in Game 7, simply because of John's conditioning where he was. He was ready to go, and I think it was Ramon Ortiz. Was one of the possibilities. So that wasn't exactly a pitching dominant series. So with Ned and Felix Rodriguez, I don't know what was going on, but I do recall, even from our standpoint, if that had been an 8-game series, I think we would have struggled to have some adequate pitching.
Thank you.
I will tell you, and I thought you were going to go a different direction with that question. A lot of people point out Dusty giving Ortiz the ball, which is, did it rile the Angels? Did they see it? There's been a lot of speculation. I don't think so. I'll tell you really what it was. The way I look at it, that club, and I know this is going to sound like a Captain Obvious, but that club, more than any club I've been around, not just because they won the World Series, they played 27 outs. And I think that the one thing about sports, in baseball and like any of the other sports, baseball is a game, just a momentum. You can't stop it. And I think there was that, you're looking ahead a little bit. Ortiz had thrown well. Dusty's and the Giants certainly are, look, anybody who says you don't look ahead of what that moment would be like is probably being disingenuous a little bit. But it was a realization that club played 27 outs as hard as any team mentally and physically that I've seen. And I think they didn't use it as motivation. I think there was just that, that club just didn't stop. And that was just a moment that, to me, it just really reinforced how tough that group was.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, sir.
Joe Margolin?
Gareth,
Go ahead, Joe.
may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Tim, I know that your position is primarily administrative, but you are an administrator that can educate other people in connection with the hall. The ERA committee is meeting again. And this time around, they have a chance to, for the last time, to undo a grave injustice. And I think you can get the idea from the hat that I'm wearing, okay? And I have a feeling, see, I don't know the members of the committee, and I know you do, and you're not on the committee, so you don't have a vote, but you do have the ability to educate the committee, to give them information, give them all kinds of information about the candidates that they're going to be evaluating. Because I seriously doubt that the members of that committee either saw Hodges live, they maybe didn't even see any of the films. They certainly maybe they did read maybe there's 5 or 6 books that are on him. And perhaps maybe even traveled over the Gil Hodges Memorial Bridge in Brooklyn. Maybe all of those things did happen, but I don't think so. But you have a way of presenting information. You can do it on all the candidates. It just doesn't have to be him. But somebody really should educate them in that regard, because we're talking about the rejection of a candidate who, when I think of what happened this past year, I heard that a candidate for the Hall of Fame maybe didn't get in because of a character problem, okay? And yet the Hall of Fame has rejected the man, and I grew up with that time with Hodges. I met Hodges in the dugout at Ebbets Field in 1955. Gives you a little idea that I'm probably maybe one of the older people here tonight, okay? And he represented the character that our parents wanted us to become. I mean, there were many parents from that time period grow up to be like Gil Hodges. The man was a great ball player. The man was a great community member. He was a war hero on top of everything else, and went on to become a championship manager. His numbers certainly warranted it. And yet nobody's explained why in all of these years he has been avoided. And maybe because it's possible the people on that committee don't know all of this information. So I ask you, Tim, why don't you educate them? Why don't you prepare something? Give them the films, or we get direct. You don't have to endorse, just present it.
Right.
If they
Joe,
understand.
Joe, I appreciate that, and we're going to carve out 15 minutes for you to make a presentation to the Veterans Committee.
No problem. I'll be in Cooperstown that day.
Well, first of all, I appreciate it, and I was hopeful or knew that question, something along those lines, was going to come up. So you know, a couple things that I don't want to, because this could be a whole Zoom call, that there is something that most people don't really realize. It's called the Historical Overview Committee, which is comprised of primarily historians and writers, okay? They come up with the 10 candidates that are going to be on the ERA ballots, okay? So when you take those 10 names and move forward, now you get to the 16 Veterans Committee. The one thing, Joe, to point out, I don't know who's on the Veterans Committee right now because it hasn't been selected for this year. Okay, it's not a committee that rolls over. It's not a term committee. So in that regard, you try to keep out any patterns, any anything. You just make it fresh each and every year. The Veterans Committee is comprised of historians and writers, some statisticians, some executives, and that could be former general managers, it could be owners, and then Hall of Famers. And generally, I believe we try to go four historians, writers, 3 to 4 executives, and the rest, and majority, Hall of Famers. Everybody, even the Historical Overview Committee, before they select the 10, they come to Cooperstown about once every 2 years and work with our library and our curatorial people and do a tremendous scrub through for potential candidates, okay, that should go up for consideration on that 10-person list. Once they arrive at those 10 names, there is then a binder put together of statistical and bio information of the 10 candidates for consideration. In addition to that, we receive, and everybody on the Historical Overview Committee and everybody on the Veterans Committee is made aware of folders of information on top of what we provide to the Veterans Committee that, I'll throw the name out. We've had, there's been a group in Philadelphia that really has pushed for Dick Allen. And some of those folks have sent us lots and lots of information. I would tell you that this is not a group, Joe, of folks that go into that room that are quasi baseball people. These are baseball people and know it. And as we go on through the years, certainly some of those candidates, all 16 members of the Veterans Committee certainly didn't see a Gil Hodges or a Dick Allen play. But
Excuse me 1 second, Tim. I hate to cut in, but when you're 76, you got to speak while you still can talk. Okay? Yeah, this group, you people that are here tonight, and including the Veterans Committee, have a unique opportunity on March 18th. They can turn on Gary's program that night. And if they have any questions about candidate Hodges, they can ask his roommate. His 94-year-old roommate will be talking to you folks on March 18th. That's something you can't supply or haven't supplied. That might be something they might want to try.
And Joe, I appreciate it. And congratulations. I hope we're doing this in 10 years on your 86th. But we won't know that committee until the summer.
Okay.
What we do is we present, it's going to be anywhere between 85 to 100 names. The board of directors will approve who we can discuss, be it on the electorate, and then we try to match names. And in that electorate, you try to make sure that there's minimal conflict of interest, so that it is a very objective process. And I'll give you an example, Joe. If we were doing this, having this conversation at this time in 2019, the name that might have popped up differently would have been Marvin Miller. And there were a lot of people, and Marvin, the last time had 11 votes. Okay, and obviously is in part of the class of 2020. So the conversation, I've only sat in on one Veterans Committee thus far, and I can tell you that the discussion, and that's part of, and anybody else out there wondering why we didn't have a Veterans Committee last year, people say, well, we're all Zooming now. Why couldn't you have just Zoomed it? Well, think of the distractions we may go through in an hour on this call. Now you're going to talk about sitting someplace for anywhere between 5 to 7 hours of discussion. You have the dog walk in, somebody's iPhone goes off. These are decisions that change people's lives and affect them. It has to be undivided attention. And the integrity that goes on in that, there's no cheerleading. It is looked at in a very unbiased manner, and everybody is discussed. The qualities, the concerns, what kind of teammate, all those variables. I can't tell you what was discussed in the last time that Gil Hodges came up, but the fact that anybody on that electorate is considered the 10 best of that period of time, I know that's not good enough to be in the hall, but that's a special recognition in itself. So the short answer for my long-winded explanation is, the one thing I will assure you is there will be no shortage of information. There's just no, we sit there, there's computers, there's statistics, war now is looked at. So maybe the last that the Gil came up, statistics and analytical, I don't know if Ken's still on here, but Ken, you look at things a little bit differently now than perhaps you did 5 or 7 years ago. Okay, well, the same thing is applicable even when you're in that room. And that's why you leave that openness and that possibility. So I would just say, Joe, that the fair shot will be there. I don't even know who is on that 10-person list right now, because I haven't seen it. we don't influence decisions. That's not the hall's role, but we are responsible for making certain that those people that are involved have all the information possible to make the best possible decision. And last thing, to move on to the next question, when the 16 individuals vote, it is a silent vote. They turn in the paper. The only 3 people that see that are Jane Clark, John Shestakowski, and myself. And each of us go through and we check it off so that it's check and balanced 3 different times. The committee doesn't know who won until about 15 minutes before I go on television or Jeff went on television. So we don't sit in the room and say, okay, well, in San Diego, that group didn't know until, again, about 15 minutes, 20 minutes before Marvin Miller's name was announced that they had selected Marvin Miller. So, Joe, I appreciate your passion for it, and we do get correspondence and support of Gil Hodges and others, and everybody should be so lucky to have that kind of fan support.
Hey, Joe, I
Thanks
agree with
a-
everything
thanks a
you
lot.
said. The other piece here is Mrs. Hodges is still alive. And the big stat with Hodges was when he retired, he had the 2nd most home runs of any right-handed hitter in baseball history with 370. Fox was the only one that was ahead of him. I disagree with one thing you said, Joe. I had a couple of conversations with Erskine. I'm going to have another one tomorrow, maybe later on, but his roommate was Duke Snyder. And he said he heard Duke say many times, we hate the Giants so much, we even hate Halloween. But just on another side here, you have a lot of Giant fans here, and you have Jamie Rupert here. We're pushing right now for Horace Stoneham, which is a similar situation. Who's Horace Stoneham? People don't remember him. It's very similar to Hodges. And we would hate to have to pick one over the other, I guess, because it's hard enough to get one in. It's 12 out of 16, right? You need 12 votes.
And to that point, when you look at that 10-person, potential electees, it's not an easy separation to say that the 10th player or the 10th individual is that much, that far away from the top 2. It's difficult, and the greater, well, I don't know that any 10-person list can be a bad list. It makes it difficult, and that's why even this last year, guys, in January, or this past January, when the BBWAA didn't elect anybody, 75% is a tough total.
Very tough.
It's a Hall of Fame for a reason, and it's just not a given. It's a very difficult process. And I would tell you that those writers, the members of the BBWA, toil as much at each one of their votes. And they have multiple people. They have beyond 10 possibilities. They toil as much as a 16-person Veterans Committee does, because everybody takes it very seriously. But everybody conceivably can look at, you and I can look at the same set of stats differently, and that's what makes it intriguing.
But on our behalf, you got Rupert in there, you got O'Malley in there. The last piece of the puzzle is Mr. Stoneham. I mean, and again, you don't have a vote. I know.
With that being said, Jamie, why don't you ask whatever you wanted to ask?
Well, my goodness, Tim, again, thanks for all this information. It's really vital. It's been a long process, as you know, for all of us. And I would love, again, if we get the opportunity, how do we generally, so we're not being specific to a candidate, but again, I think it goes back to the point of people who don't even know the name, for people that were so foundational to the current state of the game. You can't look at baseball today and not go back in its history, back to 1919, when the Stonehams owned the Giants, and the social and cultural impact where baseball stands today, I think the hall really has a chance to highlight the role of baseball in really our society and how progressive baseball was back in the day, because of the love of the game and because it was family oriented. So I would love to help try to understand, how do we start to, again, you're looking at the team here. This is our team who wants Horace in the hall. Again, I don't have the means to mount a big campaign. We were able to get a film with Willie McCovey and Mays and Gaylord Perry and Orlando Cepeda, a little 3-minute commentary about the people who knew my grandfather. So
Yes, ma'am.
I guess the question is, how do we, and my grandfather didn't do PR. I think that's the other thing. Rob Garrett was the first person who did 6 chapters in a book on Horace, and that was 3 years ago. So how do we find the way to not have maybe a bias? Again, my grandfather's legend in baseball is that he was a drunk. Well, that's not who he was. It was an aspect of what happened. But, so how do we really get beyond I get there's historians, but how do we really get to the broader cultural impact? Why we all love this game so much? It's our family and it's baseball. But there are foundational people that we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for them through the continuum of time.
I appreciate that, and it's a pleasure making this introduction, electronically. A name, and getting to your grandfather, a name that will always be close to me, that, when you talk about people disappear because we age out in time, Buzzy Bavasi.
Right.
Would have 4 world championships. Doesn't come up that
Buzzy.
often. And Buzzy was a mentor. I mean, you listen to Buzzy and he taught you things. I think ultimately one of them, and I'll get back to Dick Allen and that group. Not knowing right now who the committee is, this isn't one of those things where you can influence and, maybe the Hollywood Foreign Press where you could send them something to do. I don't know how all that works, but social media is a very important tool, and it's awareness. So I don't think that you have to necessarily tell the story, and again, I can only speak right now for people that I don't even know who are going to be on it. But I think it's creating awareness of this is the name. I mean, look what Major League Baseball did with the recognition of the Negro League players from 20 to 48 and putting them, giving them inclusion in Major League Baseball now as major leagues. Okay, now, and a lot of the historians and Sabre people know, but the general fan doesn't. So now if you really love the game, you're going to go back and study. So what it is I just think it's like anything else. It's bringing it out of the closet and the storage unit of awareness. And if you use your social media, powers and contacts a little bit, and, locally, certainly you have some great writers and media personnel in the Bay Area. That John Shea just comes to mind as obviously one of the great writers. But just talk about it and stir it up with some of the influencers in sports social media. Get a conversation about the individual. Is it going to influence? I don't know. But if it's not out there, I can assure you it's not going to influence.
Right.
Just in the discussion. And I think obviously your grandfather, and I know that history of success and what he's meant. Again, I'll get back to Buzzy in a similar manner of, we just have to bring the names out.
Right. Right.
And ma'am, the one thing is we hear grassroots and we just think everything has to be big. Great campaigns and great accomplishment starts small, and all you're looking for is awareness.
Okay.
So I think don't try to have some kind of big political campaign. The sports people and the baseball people are the baseball people.
Yep.
They're paying attention. They'll pay attention.
Well, and I really appreciate what you were saying about Mr. Autry. He was a dear friend of my grandfather's, and the reverence that you have for him. I think that's what I'm sad isn't there for my grandfather. There isn't a Horace Stoneham suite. There isn't a street. There isn't anything, even from the team itself. So I'm so happy to hear how you talk about Mr. Autry, because he was a fabulous man.
Yeah,
Well,
I
thank you.
think
And-
whether you think should be a Hall of Famer or not, in today's society, Tim, like you're saying about social media, I mean, the buzzword all you have to hear now is diversity. And he was very influential with the African Americans, with the Asians, with the Latinos. So, I mean, I hope that for those who believe that he should be at least on the ballot, that'd be one of the reasons he would be. Terry Barber, you're up.
Hey, hi, Tim.
Hi, how are
So,
you?
good, thank you. When I first started umpiring 41 years ago, it was out in Palm Springs, California, where the Angels trained back then at that little ball field in back of the library. Do you remember?
Yes. Oh, yes. Spent a lot of
And
time.
I was lucky enough to sort of become adopted by Jimmy Reese. And I was wondering if you could just give us a couple of stories about Jimmy, because I just loved him so much. And he
Well,
was so nice to my mother and me. He would leave us tickets for any Angels game we wanted to go at Anaheim Stadium. And we went to all of them.
well, I tell you, Jimmy, we called him Dunk, and he was our conditioning coach. Probably till he was 88, 89.
Yeah.
One of the things about Jimmy is he always insisted on paying for everything. So in spring training, we would go out. It was generally coaching staff or he always included us. There'd be 8, 9 guys, and we always had to give the credit card to the waitress first. And when the bill would come to be about $35, $40, and he'd look and wonder what was going on and question the waitress. And we always gave her the line, it's the Tuesday special or whatever. And you're our guest tonight, Mr. Reese. And because if you paid for something and Jimmy was there, he may not talk to you for 2 or 3 days.
He was the greatest that way. Yeah.
The best
He
fungo
took
hitter.
good care of us.
Yes, the best fungo hitter I ever saw in an art that's gone
The
from the
Fungo
game.
King. That was his. they
Fungo
called him.
King, and the flat bat that he would, when Jimmy Abbott came up in 1989, we're in Palm Springs, and I just always remember, Jimmy running Jimmy Reese and Kirk McCaskill back and forth. And he literally, you could put a glove, he could stand behind second base and you could put a glove in left center or right center, and he could one hop or hit that glove. People tell amazing stories, but one of the most poignant moments for me is that we traded Jim to the Yankees for JT Snow and was it Russ Springer and Jerry Nielsen, I think, Ken? Jerry Nielsen, thank you. And it broke Jimmy Reese's heart because Jimmy Reese and Jim Abbott were, and still are, were like that. I got a picture in my office here in '89. Jimmy Reese always represented that you're never too old to do something important.
Sure.
Jimmy Abbott always, reflects physical challenges don't have to be obstacles. But Jim came back with the Yankees to Anaheim, and we had a visiting clubhouse or a locker room that we didn't use. And we put Jimmy Reese in there just by himself and got a chair, and I went and got Jimmy Abbott out of the Yankee clubhouse. And, I can get chills right now when we brought Jimmy in there to look at the two of them hug because he so loved him. And he was.
And didn't he also have a great influence on Nolan Ryan's career
Oh, yeah.
when Nolan went to the Angels?
Well, that's who Reese Ryan is named after.
Yeah,
Jimmy Reese.
Yeah.
In fact, after Jimmy passed away, before we went into the new ballpark, we left Jimmy's locker intact in the clubhouse. He always, in fact, I have his bag after he passed. Our late equipment manager gave me his last equipment bag with jerseys and some of his things, and I made sure that certain people that were extremely close to him got part of that uniform. Jimmy comes from a different generation, a lost generation, I think, that he would talk about stories of going over to Babe Ruth's house after a Sunday game. And I think it was Claire Ruth at that time, would be upset because they were late. And Jimmy would talk about he just stood there signing all the autographs. At one point, I think he had a dozen autograph balls, and true to Jimmy Reese, he gave everything away.
He used to say when he was Babe Ruth's roommate, all he ever saw of him was his suitcase.
Suitcase. Yep. But he always talked very fondly of who he was as a person. And Jimmy was. I'll tell you one quick story before you get on the next question. We were 89, 90. I think San Diego was 91 All-Star game. We had it in 89 or 92. Jimmy Reese was the honorary captain and went down there to throw the first pitch. So we did the press conference at Jack Murphy Stadium, standing against the wall, and Joe DiMaggio comes down from the walkway to my left. And you see it, and you just know when Joe DiMaggio was in the vicinity, you kind of just backed and gave space. So Jimmy's standing there with the sports coat that he wore every place on every road trip and all. Joe DiMaggio came to Jimmy Reese and asked him how he was doing. Do you see anybody from the old group? And they had a 15-minute conversation. And
That's respect.
that was respect. So,
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate your talking about him.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm just so happy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
I have a comment and a question. Kudos to Jamie for holding her grandfather in such high esteem. I hope my granddaughter thinks of me when I'm gone. So when the Giants left when I was 10, I was going to the Polo Grounds starting in 1949 when I was 2 years old. So it broke my heart when they left. Peter McGowan figured out a way to keep the Giants in San Francisco, but there wasn't enough done by the city and the ownership to keep the Giants and Dodgers there. Now to Tim, the question is about the steroid issue, and is there a forum just like when Roger Maris and when Commissioner Frick had the asterisk for Roger Maris? Is there any forum at all to put, like, whether it's the RX symbol instead of the asterisk, to give Hank Aaron back his home run record and Roger Maris the seasonal record?
No, sir. No movement. I haven't heard in my short time with the Hall, I haven't heard any discussion along those lines.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Next question.
Gary, can I ask a question? Is Ed Freer?
Ed, absolutely.
Okay, first time I went to Cooperstown, I remember seeing a wonderful painting of the Polo Grounds from the third base side, looking towards left field with the pennants, and I thought it was a very nice painting. Of course, when I went back 10 years later, it's gone, Is there a way for anybody to research the archives from, paintings or literature, especially if we're interested in the Polo Grounds or whatnot, that's not on the generic website? I've looked before, and you don't see these more esoteric items.
So your question is, could you have access to researching them?
Yes.
Okay. Let me
But
give
just
you
see what's there.
Let me give you my email address,
Sure.
and you could send me that, and I will find out the location. We're going through a digitization process with a lot of the photos. And I don't know exactly on this call how many of those are accessible or where we're at with them, but I'd be glad to find that out separately for you. Email address is tmead@baseballhall.org.
tmead@baseball.org.
Baseballhall.org. Yep.
If I could
Baseballhall.org.
just interject, Tim, anytime I've ever had any kind of major question, your staff there preceding you, and probably still, were just wonderful getting back to you. They always get back, people from
Always.
the library, and they really deserve some kudos.
Thank you for that, because I'll tell you, I made a lot of those calls from Anaheim to this staff, and it's impressive, and it's a passion. You know, there's only a few of us there that have major league club experience. And I'll tell you some of the knowledge that the folks, the Bill Francis and Eric Strolls and Tom Schiebers and John Odell's, Jim Gates before that have, I could have used some of that knowledge doing my previous job, because it's amazing, and they do it with such passion and thoroughness, and you can pretty much take it to the bank when they get back to you with information.
Plus you inherited Rose.
Yes, yes. Who is the boss? Who is ultimately the
Yes.
boss? Rose Morley is the executive assistant. She was for Dale Petrosky and Jeff Idelson, and now myself. And she has her process. And I come from a world where generally when the phone rings, you just pick it up. And she has a hard time with me still being the PR guy picking up the phone. I get scolded a little bit, and I just say, look, if I know that's Bill, whomever, I just call him and he's calling me back. She goes, there's protocol. So I've gotten my hand slapped a few times by my executive assistant, but she runs a place. And Jeff told me about that.
We got a question about the Negro Leagues from Brian. Brian, you there?
Yes, how are you? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Brian.
Hi, yes, how are you, sir?
Good. How are
Thank you for doing this. Good. Just a little bit of background. I'm a volunteer and advocate for an old Negro League stadium in Paterson, New Jersey, and it's hopefully going to be restored starting this April. My question is, with the recent advent of Major League Baseball elevating the Negro Leagues, do you anticipate or see the possibility for more Negro League players to enter the Hall of Fame?
I think it's always a possibility. I think one thing we've learned in our lives is never to say never. One of the great things is it's been open through the eras, because research, history continues to uncover different research. And while most people think that most of the available statistics have been found and seen, this recent decision opens the door for certainly additional conversation. And I don't think you ever close anything off as we know everything there is to know about something. And we're going to look at things with different lenses. As we alluded to earlier with analytics, that's opened the door for how we evaluate players. I mean, when I started, now it seems like ancient history, but it was home runs, RBIs, average runs scored, wins, win percentage and different things like strikeouts. But we're looking at players differently. So even in 2006, when the special committee was formed and put in the 17 Negro League performers, even at that time, look how much has changed, 13, 14 years later now, how we evaluate performance. So I don't think anything's closed off.
Great, thanks for the answer.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else with a question?
I know you don't want to do this, Tim, but I don't know how many of you guys and ladies are members of the Hall of Fame. It's not an expensive proposition, and it's well worth it. Once you join, you get a beautiful yearbook. This is one of the older ones. You get 4 or 5 magazines a year, Memories and Dreams. They're priceless. The photos alone. You get a pin, you get a hat, you get a 10% discount on anything you buy. And if you go up to the Hall of Fame, and I've probably been there more than anybody on the Zoom, especially during induction weekend, you don't have to wait online. There's a separate line. So you ought to check it out. Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a wonderful, wonderful organization, obviously, and membership is not expensive. Thank you.
Thank you for reading that just like I wrote it.
Gary,
That was a great ad. Thank you.
Gary?
Ernestine, you're up. Ernestine?
Thank you. Tim, I just want to thank you. First of all, for your generosity and your time with not only the group tonight, but also for SABR. I worked on that program. We're still getting comments on your terrific presentation for the 50th anniversary of SABR. I just also wanted to mention to you, I grew up in Washington diehard Senators fan. So we have a conversation ahead of us, and I have my original Washington Senators baseball cards. So I can't see Tim. I see somebody's, does
Well,
he hear me?
He's smiling, so.
I'm hearing
He
you.
hears
I
you.
hear you.
Oh, there you are. Okay, good. Hi.
I
But
have to
really,
tell you.
thank you so much
for that.
for your Sabre Day. I was delighted to work on the program, and I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you because I worked with Bob, but you were terrific, and we had, the feedback has just been nonstop. But here I am in New York City all these years later, grew up in Washington, and we will have our own conversation. But by my calculation, and this is where I wanted to ask you, isn't this the 85th anniversary of the Hall of Fame? This year, 1936?
Yes.
39.
Well, it's 39, yeah.
You were founded in
The
36.
class,
So I
yes.
don't know when you celebrate, which
We
one you
celebrate on,
actually recognize.
we celebrate on 9s and 4s.
Right.
Our anniversary.
9s and 4s.
Yes. The one thing that I wanted to tell you, and I appreciate, I'll look forward to an offline conversation at some point.
Yeah.
In 2019, it is very strange to spend 40 years in one clubhouse. Though I spent a lot of time going and visiting clubhouses and seeing ex-Angels or former Angels through the years and visit with them. But to go into the clubhouse of the Nationals, I couldn't help but realize, to me, it was kind of like coming full circle in my love of the game life, my personal life, to see a W in a World Series championship.
Oh, I'm sure.
It really was, and nobody else, most people wouldn't understand what I was talking about, but when I walked in there and saw that, and then to walk in the corner, and, I watched him grow up as a puppy with us and Howie Kendrick, to see him in the corner. And I'll tell you a funny, not a funny story, but it's a great story for me personally with Howie. I texted him after he hit the grand slam against the Dodgers in the series and congratulated him. And I said, hey, if you're interested, we would love to have something. But, I threw that in after I genuinely was happy for him in his moment. And he goes, yeah, you want the bat? Now this is 1 in the morning, 1:15 in the morning here. So we get to the World Series, John and I, Shostakowski and I, and we're in the clubhouse, and Howie gives me his bat, and I take it back to the hotel and all. And we get to the World Series in Game 7, and we didn't go into the clubhouse until most of the celebration had died down. And Howie was at his locker, and he's got that big grin when he sees me. And we give each other a hug because it was just two guys that grew up together, and we went through a lot of things together because watching him grow up. And gave him a hug, and I said, I guess I'm going to ask again. He looked at me and he goes, yeah, you want the ball? I mean, just like that. Yeah, you want the ball? I said, sure, Howie. And he reached into a small bag and he grabbed the ball with the yellow from the foul pole, and he said, here. And that's the way it happened. And, it was special because for me personally to watch him, he went through some tough postseasons with the Angels as he was just maturing, but to see him be the star in that emotion and in that clubhouse and with a W on it, it just, for me, it was very, very special.
Tim,
Well, this is the 60th anniversary of the first team, 1961, when the first Senators moved to Minnesota. So this year, you were just a baby. If you were born in 1958, you don't remember. I'm a little bit older, so I can just say that when the Senators moved to Minnesota and became the Twins, it was really a very sad time in Washington, because those are the original Senators, and I was in Griffith Stadium when I was 3 years old. So it's now 60 years, which of course, when I say that number, it doesn't seem possible, but since the original Senators moved to Minnesota.
I'm glad
Also
I wasn't in Arlington when the Senators left.
That's right. You weren't there yet. So
yeah,
you were the second. You grew up with the second.
All right. We have Jeff Cohen, then Hindi, then George. Jeff, you're up.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Tim, for all the information. Really enjoyed this presentation. I want to echo what Joe said earlier about Gil Hodges, and I want to congratulate Perry Barber for being inducted into the New York State Hall of Fame. So congratulations to Perry as well. My question has to do with the Hall of Fame voting, and we all heard the term baseball has changed over the years, but so has the Hall of Fame voting. I mean, I remember a time when the voters didn't have to show their ballots, and now every year, dozens and dozens of them are writing about who they voted for and why. My question is, how much influence do you think social media had over the voting processes these last decade or so?
That's a good question, Jeff, but I would tell you, just from my personal viewpoint, even before I got here, I think that the ladies and gentlemen that get to vote take it very, very serious. I think it's, there's a lot of, our politicians, their vote, they do it openly. There's kind of a split camp. Well, there's a lot of voters that would like it to be public, because I mean, if you're going to make a decision on somebody, you kind of should have to explain. Now, if the writers have a choice in their ballot 2 weeks after the announcement to make their ballot public or not. A lot of them using the social media, certainly their choice. Does it influence? I don't know. I mean, maybe if you're a young writer and you're looking up to somebody, but well, it's not even a young writer. I mean, you have to have 10 years of experience to do this. So I think they all think with their own minds. I think people interpret things differently. I think what's unfortunate just about the social media world, it's, this year, and Ken, I'm not picking on you on this, but I think there were fewer folks that made their vote public on social media in advance in the tracker than last year, because, it's a harsh world out there. What Ken does every day from when I started in 1980, right? It's tough to be a writer. It's tough to throw yourself out there. Forget the vote, just to write a game story and just the stuff they have to read. It's difficult, but I don't think it necessarily influences. I think these guys go into it making their own decision. I really do. It's not like there's a consortium where people say, the New England group or the Southwest group or the West Coast are going to vote for a specific person. And really what's kind of interesting is when you read them debate amongst themselves about a vote, somebody will write a column about, about the vote, about the election. And that's intriguing to me. So it's an honor to get to the point to be able to have a vote. And I don't think they're going to allow people to influence them. I really don't. And the great thing about it is Hall of Fame voting and election and support is almost a 12-month venture. There's certain times it spikes in the conversation, but the fact that people, just like, Gil Hodges, and we're having this conversation earlier, that it's in the minds of people for 12 months is part of what makes, the Veterans Committee. But obviously next year we have three gentlemen who are on the last year of the BBWA ballot. That's going to come up for discussion long before, the writers even have their ballots. So it's intriguing. It's an interesting process, and it's, when all is said and done, at the end of the day, it's opinion.
Tim, before Andy goes, I got one other thing to ask you. Because they skipped the Veterans Committee this year, are they going to have, more people possibly to vote for?
No, we just push everything back a year. Gotcha. So we'll have the two committees this year, and look, it's unfortunate. I can't make an assumption of who's going to be, on that ballot for, or how the Veterans Committee would vote for somebody, but we have a couple eras where those, older individuals, and obviously many who are not with us anymore, and it's difficult. It was a tough call last year to postpone those two era committees. but it's the right thing to do it with integrity that the process deserves. It just is. And I can't describe it with all the details other than to say, going through my first one in San Diego, I came away from it realizing, there were David Glass was on there, the late David Glass, the owner of the Royals, and, seeing Robin Young in there and others on that committee, just how serious everybody took it. It's not sitting around where you're splitting open a meal and laughing and joking. I mean, it's an intense, serious discussion. And those types of discussions should be in person with each other.
Thank you. Hindi, you're up, Hindi.
I've been to Hall of Fame weekend many times, and my question is about the town of Cooperstown, which I love. I've even been there in the winter. The last
God
few
bless
years,
you.
I haven't been there, and I'm wondering about the economic viability of all those wonderful baseball stores with the pandemic, with things that are happening. And is the Hall of Fame interested in keeping the economy going? I mean, just walking around on those weekends with all the fans around and getting autographs and going and buying things, it was incredible.
Sure we are. Sure we are. And, they're hanging in there. Obviously, we're hoping with, as I say, that we're getting close to the intersection of hope and optimism that some of these restrictions are going to be lifted forthcoming. I think there were people that showed up last July that I saw on the street and just simply said, look, we've been here for 23 straight years. Even if you're not having the induction, we're going to be here for the 24th. So there were a lot of people that made that pilgrimage to Cooperstown just to say that they continue their stretch and be part of it. Aside from induction weekend, Mariano was inducted in 2019. Obviously, a lot of people came up for the day. It's not as though everybody stayed overnight and, camped out. Certainly we draw a lot of people, but it's sustaining crowds over the course of, May through September. That's ultimately important to the village in the overall. And I think everybody kind of held their own. Were we disappointed for what we're not going to be able to do this July? Absolutely. But it's important that we all do what we can do right now so these restrictions are lifted and people feel comfortable traveling, that we can have Dreams Park and All-Star Village and these kids that are 12 years old playing in these tournaments that missed out last year, that they could come and play. I mean, there's almost 100 and over the course of 12 to 13 weeks, there's about 170 plus each week, 12-year-old teams. Those were canceled last year. That's big economics to the village and for us too. I mean, they buy a lot of tickets. It's also an opportunity to educate young kids about baseball history, and we don't want to lose that opportunity either.
George, you're up, George.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Tim. This is a general question. This year marks the 70th anniversary in October. And my question is, does anyone know if there's a memorial or a plaque or any kind of recognition of Bobby Thompson? I know of only one, and it's in Watchung, New Jersey, the home of Bobby Thompson for a while. And he's pointing to the left field from a video that Mo Resner took it on the last day of the Giants, and Perry Barber, who's here, I think, helped inspire turning Mo's video into a DVD that you have, Tim, in your collection. But the question I have is anything, 70 years to the 51 pennant, is anything going to be done to commemorate it and to honor Bobby Thompson at all?
I don't know if what baseball might do or the clubs. We have nothing planned at this point, but I just made a note of it. And I know our historians and librarians are aware of it. And I'll ask that question. I mean, one of the things we don't do a lot of temporary events or exhibits. We do a lot of things on social media. That would probably be the way we would acknowledge But as far as something else, no, nothing's planned. You bring up a good point, George, if you don't mind, and I want to read just a couple things to you folks, as we get closer. Here's some of the items. The following is a list of New York Giants highlight artifacts that the hall has. I'll see if I can. 1894, bat given to George Van Haltren for being the most popular player. 1888, the Hall Championship Cup, which is the oldest existing World Championship trophy. Giants defeated the St. Louis Browns of the American Association. 1889, the World Championship trophy. I won't read them all. 1904, Christy Mathewson uniform, sweater, and glove. Let's see. 1911, a Red Murray uniform and glove. 1912, glove used by Rube Markwood during the record-breaking season of 19 consecutive wins. 1924, World Series shirt worn by John McGraw. 1927, uniform worn by John McGraw. 1936, a Dick Bartell Road jersey. 1943, Carl Hubble shirt. 1943, the John J. McGraw Battleship christening bottle. And 1957, home and road shirts worn by Willie Mays. And the World Series pin from 1905, World Series medal from 21, and rings from 22, 33, and 54. So when next you visit us, you're likely to see some of those artifacts out in the hall.
I also believe that the Giants have the most members of the Hall of Fame from the franchise. Anybody
correct.
played on the Giants.
Yeah.
And I'm
Also,
sure
Tim-
Jamie wants to add another one, I'm sure. So.
Hey, Tim, today is March 4th. Two months from today will mark the 150th anniversary of the first game in which Deacon White got the first hit, a double of a little guy, 5'8", Bobby Matthews. 150 years, baseball history.
Wow.
May 4th, 1871.
Now-
if you're keeping score at home.
Guys, I would say this to all of you. I would hope that every organization has a passionate group like you behind it, not just the booster club for the present, but a booster club for the past. So kudos to this group. Really, it's
Tim,
impressive.
do you have time for some more questions?
Yes.
Okay, Fred Cohn, you're up, and then Renee.
What is the process to get baseball announcers into the hall?
There's the Frick Award, and there is a group of former Frick winners. And again, just like like ball players, there's an era. There's local radio, local television, national. This year Al Michaels is going to be part of this year's ceremonies. Ken Harrelson from last year, very distinguished, and that's a voting process. They come up with the recommendations, much like the historical overview committee. There's a group that comes up with the list, 3 candidates, and that's sent out to broadcasters and others to vote, and they submit their vote, and that's how we come up with the winners.
Is there certain criteria they look for?
I think there is. I can't give all the specifics, but a lot of it's longevity, success, what they've called, what they've meant to the game. It's certainly tougher measures than statistical analysis, but I think we all know when we look at those broadcasters. I mean, the former Frick winners who vote on it. When I said throw out their vote, it's not a public vote. But you kind of know when you throw a Dick Enberg and a Vince Scully and Al Michaels out there and others who fell short of being nominated, you kind of know they fall into a category, into their own. But it's very difficult because you talk about Mr. Stoneman. There's a lot of people, broadcasters who long since passed, that we didn't have a chance to, we don't hear their calls or see their calls or their work like we pay attention to players. So even in the broadcasting business, it's difficult. It's kind of very much in that business, a little bit of the recent past in the present. And, there's, I guess one thing I want to say, when you look at committees, and broadcasting is a great part of that. A general manager, when he's in August and you're sitting on 87, 89 wins, the job of that general manager is to assume you're probably going to play in October. You like your odds right now, but his job every day is to make that club better, regardless of the success you're enjoying in the moment and in the present. Same thing about the committees in the eras. Jeff Idelson and the group here did a phenomenal job of how the process is unfolded. But even moving forward, you have to continually look at it and try to make something better. There is no perfect election process. It just isn't. But you look to make it better under the circumstances and the time and the evaluation and the information, and provide everybody as much opportunity as possible. And I don't want to say fair, because we can all define how each of us mean fair, but present the opportunity in the most fair manner possible.
Renee, you're up, Renee.
Yeah, my question is a little bit radical. I've heard it before some years ago, so bear with me. I love baseball, love the induction ceremony, love months, even early on, when the voting is about to happen and we're going to find out who's going to be elected to going to the hall. I always thought, as big as that is for me, and the game, I would love to see it in a bigger way. I know both sides of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, Major League Baseball, they have their own businesses, they do their thing. What I'm thinking about in a big term is having the All-Star game weekend, not just the weekend, but also include maybe days before the induction Hall of Fame, and those winners, after they make their speeches, show up at the All-Star game. Really make a big baseball thing for a week would be fantastic. Not only for the hall, for fans like ourselves who want to see the interviews, want to see all this stuff going on, but then to see them showing up at the All-Star game, where all these kids who may not have any idea who these guys are, unless somebody's told them, see them there, get a little bit of insight on these guys. Just make the game bigger than it already is. Maybe encompass more younger fans. I don't know if that was ever thought of. That'd be a great thing for me. I mean, I would love to see, however you have that day or that weekend happening, but going into the All-Star game, days before we have the All-Star game, and those Hall of Famers show up there. It just sells itself so well.
Well, Renee, I don't think anything you just said there is radical. It's timing, which doesn't mean something can't be worked out. And, those speeches are going to be given in late July. All-Star game right now, calendar-wise, is certainly played earlier. But,
no, I understand.
But to pay homage to them before they go to Cooperstown, there's a lot of things. And, we try to look at, is there a way of having a window where baseball waits while that period of time, that window where the speeches and the induction, it's tough for the schedule makers because we don't know what the BBWA, how that vote's going to go in January, and those schedules are made up in advance. But it would be nice to have clubhouses watching it. It would be nice to have fans in the stands watching it. I don't think you can clear a Sunday, completely. It would be nice to have it be baseball's day. But again, if you have the uncertainty of not knowing that you're going to have an electee on a given year, you can't really hold off a Sunday and say, you know, we're not going to play baseball this day for the Hall of Fame. But there's other ways of doing things. I think there's certainly a proactivity.
No, I'm not saying to have it that same day, but usually baseball's off for like 4 days. So the first day that they're off would be the induction ceremony. Then the next day would supposedly be All-Star weekend. You know, just encompass all of that. You know,
Right.
Going into the last day of the All-Star game and having the All-Stars show up and maybe show a snippet of their interviews, but just encompass all of that within a 4-day span is what I'm asking.
Well, I think it's certainly the one thing is it depends on, you know, travel, because it's not just the induction day for the All-Stars or for the Hall of Famers. There are other things that happen in Cooperstown beyond Sunday. So it's looking at the whole program. But I think there is, you know, your point of inclusion at the All-Star game to some degree. It's an interesting concept. You know, there's the award ceremony that the Hall of Famers are at on Saturday. There's a parade for the citizenry and those people who travel to Cooperstown on Saturday as well. There's a gathering where there's 800 people in that gallery from clubs and families and all on Saturday. There's a team party, organization party that they host on Saturday night for the Hall of Famers. So, you know, you have to make sure all that's covered as well. But your idea and your concept of broadening it makes a lot of sense.
Couple more questions. Bill Klink?
Thank
you. Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Tim, for fielding my question. It's really a follow-up to Fred's. I'd forgotten about it, but Fred got me thinking again. Not just broadcasters, but we've talked about this before here at our meetings. Scouts and coaches need to have the doors swung wide open for them. Dan Taylor can give you all the information you need to know, or any committee would need to know, about the greatest of all, George Genovese. He is undoubtedly the greatest scout of all time. He needs to be in. And as far as coaches, hey, Johnny's saying revolutionized everything, man.
Yeah.
There's got to be a way to get these guys in. Maybe you could react to that, please.
Well, I knew Mr. Genovese, and I agree with you. I think it's, you know, I'm not sure we'll ever be able to say super scout the way we used to with George and others. But I think it's one of the things, right? You know, it's executives, umpires, and players. And other institutions or other Hall of Fames have different criteria. You know, that's the way it's kind of limited right now. Do you open it? You know, I was part of a group. There's a young lady named Roberta Mazer who handles the Scout of the Year program, and she came from the Angels and does a phenomenal job. And she's really kind of lobbied the case for scouts for a long time. Obviously, coaches. You know, when we talk about coaches, you know, it almost gets back into the broadcasting. You know, coaches have evolved through the years. But how do you go back and fairly evaluate a Red Sox coaching staff from 1912?
What about official scorers?
I don't think in the Hall of Fame. That's they certainly play a key role. Most would agree to that, but that's not something would be. There's recognition for their work, but not a plaque in the Hall. I look to Bill, to your question. I think there's, you know, we work with PBATs, Professional, Athletic Trainers Association, and, you know, the Dr. Jobs and Dr. Curlins and people that have played a key role in this game. And, you know, it might not be a plaque or an induction as a Hall of Famer, but somewhere we continue to look at the inclusion of different groups. And, you know, as I've learned the history, and I know some of this has been brought up before, it'll continue to be brought up. You know, I have a group of photographers. When you think of capturing the essence of the game and capturing the history of the game, I know the photographer who was the last photographer name's Tom Donahue, that took a photo on the field. He was a Tiger photographer. When they could go behind third base, first base, in the foul territory, back behind the plate and shoot on the field. And some of the great moments were captured. So it's kind of how you value the contribution to the game and who determines that. And the hall was based on ultimately performance. It opened the doors for umpires and executives. And I think it's, I'm not trying to dance around it. I think there's room for recognition. I don't know if it's going to be expanded in other categories.
Tim, I have some pressing question here. I don't know if it falls under your criteria in your position, but it's about baseball is the only sport, major sport, that's not on the clock. Are there continuous discussions on how to speed up the game? Because it's been slight inroads, but to me, not enough, where baseball used to be my favorite sport because I played it as a kid. I grew up with it in New York City watching 3 teams. But to me now, it's like watching the grass grow. And much of that is due to the march of relievers. So, and another part of it is the only sport without a salary cap. And so when you're watching a game now, it's like watching the grass grow. What are the discussions these days to speed up the game and stop the march of relievers, which is really like root to me and a lot of other old time fans ruin the game?
Well, Mars, in a great question, but I guess I would approach it a little bit differently. I think time is something that, the commissioner's office continues to look at. I'm glad it doesn't fall under my job description or our job description at the hall. People continue to look at it, but perhaps it's not just the time of the game now, it's the style of the game. Again, I'll get back to 2002. People had no problem when we were going first, when the Angels were going first to third and the hit and runs and all the things that were happening. When there's a lot of action, you don't necessarily notice the time. We live in a different period of time too, where our attention spans differently. I never went to a Springsteen concert and looked at my watch and said, God, I wish you'd get off the stage. I didn't want it to end, and I think that the other thing too is when you think about the way the game is played, and I'll get back to again, picking on Ken, but he's had to cover how many Red Sox and Yankee games and series and see that the game is played differently. It was see ball, hit ball. Guys had their own personal scouting report. We feel guys with so much information. There's so much involved in the game today. And part of it's the mental game. It's some of the stepping out, and you guys have read all this, so I'm not saying something that's unique. Part of it's the gamesmanship that goes on. Okay, I think, I didn't watch Ty Cobb play, so I don't know, but I think that is evolved in the game much more than that it used to. So that's part of it. No, I don't want to see a 2-1 game that takes 3 hours and 41 minutes, but I'm also not down there trying to hit a 98-mile-an-hour fastball and try to guess in, 1.3, 1.4 seconds what's coming. I think if the action on the field changed a little bit, we may change some of the conversation. Everybody is acutely aware of it. Everybody. And again, the game evolves. But when I went to the ballpark growing up, we didn't have a kids area. My dad taught me how to keep score. I didn't want the game to end. I didn't need to be distracted. Look how that's evolved and changed. So, I just, if I pay a ticket, I don't want that game to be over in 2 hours and 5 minutes. I want to enjoy it. And if you understand the game and think about it, and that's the privilege of being on the inside, the thousands or I'll say thousands of decisions that go on during the course of the game, to try to think what people are doing, to watch the nuances of it, it can help pass the time pretty quickly. I do think they're going to continue to try to ratchet down a little bit, but you don't want to legislate things too much. Some things just have to run their natural course.
All right, we got time for
Right.
one more question, maybe from somebody who has not had a chance to speak.
Really hurts the game is the
Mars?
salary cap. The big market teams scoop up all the best players, and no other major sport has a salary cap.
Yep.
Anybody else have a question for who has not spoken yet for Tim?
Just a quick point that Tim was very right to point out that there's a big difference between the length or the duration of a game and the pace of play within each half inning of the game. And that's, I think, what should be focused on, because Major League Baseball doesn't even have any control over the length of the game because of commercials and all that stuff. But umpires have a lot to say about how a game is conducted within each individual half inning. And that goes to pace of play, what we call pace of play. And there are all kinds of things we can do, chief among which is keep the batters in the batter's box and not let them, fart around pulling on their gloves and, posing and primping for hours at a time. So.
Well, and know that they're going to hear that walk-up song 200 plus times, 300 plus times at home. If you tune everything, don't spend the time listening to your walk-up music. But
yeah, a little too much preening there.
I would upset a lot of people, and I know this is recorded, but sometimes you can see the guy just take that last 3 steps and wait for the end of that tune. But
they're styling, yeah, and it wastes time. I absolutely agree.
Tim, I'm gonna wrap this up with you spoke a lot about 2002 and dagger in most of our hearts here. Thank God they eventually would have won, that they won, because otherwise we would not been able to take your talking about that. But being the guy that you are, you made it very, very palatable. So we thank you for that.
Well, Gary, we just opened it up for three world championships that followed. So
well worth the wait. So we are glad.
We
are glad you got to celebrate, because we like that as well. But Tim, we cannot thank you enough. Great for you to come aboard with us and sharing this great night with us. So give it up for Tim Mead.
Tim.
Thank you, guys.